On our way to Zeal Palace, we see a brand new explorable location, only offered by this particular game, known as Cerulean Lake. What is immediately noticeable upon entry is that we have the first non-trigger track playing in the background. It's the excellent Final Fantasy VI track, Epitaph, which I think sounds quite lovely in its Chrono Trigger based instrumentation and its placement alongside a calming body of water. It also makes sense to throw in a track by Nobuo Uematsu, since he helped finish the remainder of the Chrono Trigger soundtrack. That said, this track is definitely the highlight of this area, at least for now. Otherwise, we have a couple of folks here talking a bit about the mechanics of the lake and its beautiful vantage point. Upon entering Zeal Palace, we encounter the woman with Melchior's seed. This woman is a low-key important character because her decision to plant the seed, instead of burning it as per the Queen's wishes, sets Fiona's side quest to plant her forest in 600 AD into motion. It also makes sense that Melchior, the Guru of Life, would have an interest in distributing seeds that could provide the first steps in revitalizing the ice-ridden planet below. This sort of venture is also totally at odds with the Zeal Empire, since revitalizing the planet below means aiding the Earthbound populations. This also puts Melchior himself at even greater odds against the Zeal Empire, but more on that later. Another interesting moment in the palace is Anu vaguely saying, "Oh, he'll be back." If I had to wager a guess, I'd say that this Nu is referring to King Zeal, who at this juncture of time would have been the only significant person in Zeal to have disappeared. This is probably also a hint towards Kajar Laboratories' future 2009 title, Crimson Echoes. Another Zealian here makes mention of Melchior hanging around with odd beings that are not like the Nu that Gaspar and Balthazar hang around with. This is a reference to Maza, Mune, and perhaps Doreen. There is talk about Maza and Mune being the dream beings of Melchior. I'll explain dream beings a little more during the appendix, but I think that Maza, Mune, Doreen, and other dream beings are from the Sea of Dreams, or Zurvan. Zurvan is mentioned by another NPC shortly after this encounter, so I'll talk about that momentarily. Inside the palace's Mammon Machine room, a Zealian says they hear a faint whisper coming from the machine upon listening very closely. I think this is to point out that the energy that the machine extracts isn't a mindless energy, but hails from the being of Lavos, with his own motivations. Another Zealian calls the machine the Great Fire of their ancestors, likely a nod to the Frozen Flame. Now Melchior, as we know, is the guru that created the Mammon Machine. As such, he may be the one that knows the most about the nature of Lavos and the capabilities of his energy. The Mammon Machine is a bit of an enigma in the Chrono Series, so I'll be elaborating on it further during the appendix as well. As Magus approaches the throne room entrance, this is where he starts to become the prophet, claiming that he sees Zurvan's serene tides. Zurvan is actually mentioned by Shala during the good ending of Chrono Cross as a Sea of Dreams. I believe this is where Surge briefly goes in Radical Dreamers when the time egg breaks near the Frozen Flame. I don't think Zurvan is the darkness beyond time. Whereas the darkness beyond time is a place where worlds go to die, or are discarded, I believe Zurvan is a birthplace where worlds are created. I did some research on this term, and found out a few things about Zurvan. It's an ancient Persian word for infinite time. It's also used within the Iranian religion of Zoroastrianism, where Zurvan is a god of infinite time and space. Zurvan is the one god of neutrality with no distinction between good or evil. The concept of Zurvan has also seen similarities to the Australian indigenous concept of Dreamtime, or in everyone, where all of time can be seen in one instant. and is seen as the objective truth of time, whereas everyday life is the subjective dream emanating from that. Interestingly, in Trigger, Doreen makes mention of how the everyday world of Chrono Trigger could be a dream. Anyhow, Magus' promise of aiding Queen Zeal in her ascent to godly heights intrigues her enough to grant him her audience. Upon entry to her throne room, you might see something different about Dalton. He lacks a certain accessory. Now, I'll admit, I didn't quite catch on to his lack of an eye patch as immediately as most might have. But he did look different to me initially, in a way that I couldn't quite put my finger on. So, Magus starts putting on a very eloquent spiel on how he's been curious about the Zeal Kingdom's ascent, and wished to observe it firsthand since he allegedly has seen it already transpire in a way that mediums often do. Of course, Magus is sure to note that a misfit band of troublemakers may throw off the kingdom's destiny. Although the Queen is skeptical, she buys into his story enough to hear him continue on. He flubs on his first shot at proving his clairvoyant ability by mixing up the date of a huge storm, to which Dalton, who's maxed out on his skepticism, tries to strike fear into Magus. Keeping in character, Magus then predicts the birth of an earthbound child, which doesn't really impress Queen Zeal too much. Magus then pulls his trump card and discloses the Guru's secret laboratories hidden within the major centers of Zeal. This without a doubt gets a rise out of the Queen. So Magus brings the Queen and Dalton to one of these chambers with haste. Upon entry, even Dalton is taken aback. Magus caps off his move by showing them tomes containing magical spell research that could surpass the royal arts. Magus plays right into the Queen's and Dalton's hunger for power and distaste for anything that could undermine that. The Queen orders Dalton and his corps to seal up the rooms immediately. This reveal also puts Magus almost instantaneously into the Queen's trust. Almost. Dalton immediately becomes jealous and notes that anybody could have guessed that there'd be secret rooms, because you totally found those rooms, right, Dalton? Anyways, Dalton suggests that Magus prove his power in battle, since his foresight should somehow guarantee that he'll be alright, I guess? Magus questions this request, but it does pique the Queen's curiosity. She decides to send him to a beast's nest on the icy earth below, where an enlightened one was recently attacked. She was initially going to send Dalton and his corps to deal with the beast, but she sends Magus alone to do his dirty work. She will only speak to Magus once he has returned with the beast's hide. On his way down, Magus passes by Balthazar and one of his news. Balthazar notices his shadowy aura, and as we see later on, this is enough to make Balthazar cautious when returning to Zeal. Upon arriving at the nest, a lasher greets Magus to tell him where the beast resides, and then leaves him to it. So here we see how a dungeon in Prophet's Guile operates. Items can still be found in chests, as well as through defeating enemies. In this dungeon, ethers, mid-ethers, mid-tonics, and full tonics can be found. Enemies tend to have blatant weaknesses to certain types of magic or physical attacks. In the case of this dungeon, the slushes and disgusts are weak against fire, and the plane bounds are weak against lightning. Since it's Magus fighting solo, this seems to be the best way to make battles fair. However, enemies generally do a fair amount of damage to compensate for their weak points. You still get experience points when you win a battle, although you can easily beat the game without really raising Magus' level. And of course, money is not won through battles. On the top level of the nest, you'll have to be careful of slipping off the edge and back onto the base level. Although if you slip off a particular location, you'll find a neat little secret chest containing Ignobilis? Which seems to be an old useless coin. We'll touch on that later.